Dr. Brea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to share my view regarding the historical perspective on the development of the political crisis in Ethiopia. My name is Asafa Abraha. I am Ethiopian. My training is in development economic planning, and I have been engaged in development field as a researcher as well as practitioner for a long time. I was among those Ethiopians victimized by the defunct government, was a political prisoner for 6 years in Addis Ababa. My testimony is based on the experience from the field and not on desk observations from the comforts of Washington, D.C. I've been going to northern Ethiopia since 1985 and watched the struggling people in action. My recent travel to Ethiopia included visits to Tigray, Wollo, Gondar, and Gojam. I have talked to many people who told me that they were doing everything they could to rid of the tyrannical Derg system so as to bring peace, democracy, and progress to Ethiopia. Some of the major activities at the time included land redistribution and work on soil and water conservation. Historically speaking, Mr. Chairman, Ethiopia is among the oldest countries in the world, with an ancient civilization comparable to other great civilizations, as some of the members of the committee observed earlier. Its past engineering and architectural achievements are still evident in the form of the monolithic obelisks at Aksum and many magnificent rock-hewn churches in the highlands of Tigray and Wollo. However, its system of government had been autocratic, and that autocracy had been expanded through feudal expansion and annexation to other territories during the scramble for Africa towards the end of the 19th century. Now, what are the causes of the political crisis in Ethiopia today? It is this autocratic system. It is the annexation and discrimination and suppression of peoples in the country. It's also the Eritrean question. As a multinational and a multi-religious empire state, Ethiopia's problem also included the issue of domination by the central ruling establishment and the international dimension, both at global and regional levels. All are related and interact upon one another. The anti-democratic nature of the state generated economic and political policies that blocked development. Cultural, linguistic, and social oppressions as well were made central to the policy of domination by the ruling establishment. Consequently, Ethiopia's capacity to create a dual process of assimilation within a nation and destruction of multinational forms through development, as in Europe, for instance, was impaired. Various oppressed peoples have been waging different forms of struggle for a long time to overthrow the oppressive system. Those of Walaga, Bali, Gojam, Tigray, etc. can be considered in this connection. The Ethiopian empire state did not treat the Eritreans any differently. They had acquired a relatively free press, free trade union, and freedom assembly during the British administration. The federal arrangement as well had given them internal autonomy. However, it's instructive to note that the Ethiopian ruling elites did not want the federation to be implemented as resolved by the United Nations. They considered it a direct threat to their hegemony and as an example to the other components of the empire state, which would demand similar status sooner or later. So instead of building on the experience gained from the federation and expand it to other provinces, the central government systematically and deliberately undermined it and unilaterally abolished in 1962. The cause of the political crisis, Mr. Chairman, is rooted in the nature of the system of governance. There has not been any democratic system universally applicable to all of Ethiopia. Although feudalism has been weakened in the main and its institutions have been dismantled, the Derg system was non-participatory and even more authoritarian. For the last 17 years, the people have been struggling to dismantle the authoritarian system and replace it with a democratic one. The victories that the struggling people have scored so far are not limited to military gains. They also include the unfolding of fundamental social transformation. In the process of the long struggle, the people have managed to dismantle the bureaucratic structures of the oppressive system instituted by the central establishment. From Aksum to Walia to Mens to Gondar to Bahar Dar to Nakam, the people have established their baitos, shongos, chafes, or councils. They have been exercising the basic principles of authentic democracy, that is, electing their delegates to represent them in the shongos and to hold them accountable and recall them at any time. There are already local democratic government structures in place. Further, the struggling people have achieved access to and control over their major means of production, that is, land. It's owned by the people and controlled by their own councils. So far, radical and equitable land redistribution has been carried out in Tigray, Wollo, Northern Shawa, and Gondar. Peasants are able now to enjoy the fruits of their labor and dispose of their produce wherever they want and at prices determined by market forces. They cannot be forced any longer, as indeed they had been hitherto by the Derg, into villagization, collectivization, resettlement, and conscription into the army. Peasants are no longer forced to make crop and labor contributions. The role of the democratic fronts in all those democratic successes has been to enable the people to set and pursue their own agenda. This has been achieved through what can be described as a bottom-up or grassroots approach, which consists of the strategies of facilitatory, persuasive, demonstration, and advisory. It needs to be noted that the process of struggle has been a process of learning. It has been a process of mutual learning for both the people and the fighters. The most important achievement of the learning process has been the realization of the fundamental fact that in order for the struggle to succeed, it has to serve the democratic rights and interests of the struggling people. The people here are at the center stage. Some individuals of the exiles in Washington find it difficult to accept the glorious victories of the people of Ethiopia over the tyrannical regime. It is ironic that rather than celebrate the fall of tyranny, some of the exiles are making frantic attempts to stir up conflicts among the various ethnic groups of Ethiopia. They have been making inflammatory rhetorics to foster ethnic division and animosity. It should be noted that some individuals of the exiles in Washington who are shedding crocodile tears were the very people who helped design the tyrannical system and carry out its atrocities against the Ethiopian people and the country. If their actions and rhetorics are anything to go by, they must have been beneficiaries of the defunct tyrannical system. They are so desperate about the victories of the people that they claim so much through some of their mouthpieces in the press, such as that the Tigrayans are occupation forces, they are invading forces, and that they are a minority, etc. It would be against the democratic aspirations of the people of Ethiopia if the previous ruling elites who came from a minority should be replaced by another minority. When speaking of numbers, however, it should be remembered that much as they paid huge sacrifices to protect the independence of Ethiopia in the past, the people of Tigray have paid disproportionately immense sacrifice during the struggle to defeat the totalitarian regime. Having said that, it should be added that the people of Tigray aspire for peaceful and democratic resolution of the conflicts to bring about equality and progress. They want, together with their other Ethiopian compatriots, to build a democratic Ethiopia where everyone feels they belong there, where discrimination against nationality and religion is abolished once for all, and an Ethiopia where there will not be any second-class citizens anymore. What those individuals, exiles, claim and think, whatever they think, the popular democratic struggle has defeated the tyrannical system because the people not only supported but fully participated in it. The struggle has succeeded because it is an authentically democratic and popular struggle led by revolutionary democratic forces. What does one understand by unity in the Ethiopian context? Is it territorial or people's unity that one is talking about? Whose interest does unity serve? These questions must be seriously tackled. The issue of unity cannot be viewed in isolation from the democratic question. They are interrelated. If unity is to serve the interests of the people, it has to be brought about by themselves. Unity cannot be sustained by means of force. Thus, there is no difference between unity and democracy. The people expected democracy from the 1974 revolution. When the Derg took over power, the situation got from bad to worse. The suppression was more intensified. The policy of oppression continued unabated. Yet, the Derg continued with the slogan of unity and committed horrifying atrocities against the people in various areas of the country. However, unity did not come about. Instead, the struggle against oppression and for democracy got strengthened and spread throughout the country. Right. So if the question then is, if there is democracy, there is no reason why there will not be unity. Unity is mutual. People live in unity in order to serve their own interests and not to do favor to others. Unity can come about on the basis of mutual interest. If, on the other hand, oppression and coercion continues, there would not be unity and the country could be disintegrated. The state reached currently in Ethiopia can be characterized by the following factors. The tyrannical system, which had been suppressing all the peoples, has been demolished. This has opened the way for reconciliation and magnanimity, as the great majority of the population had suffered under the same system. The condition for ensuring the process of self-determination has been created through A, the establishment of law and order and relative stability, B, dismantling of the coercive structures of the defunct system. These achievements so far will help unfold the process of democratization and creation of lasting peace in Ethiopia. It must be underlined here that in spite of the doomsayer's prophecy that the marauding forces were going to cause bloodbath, take revenge and vendettas in Addis Ababa, nothing of the sort has happened. All indications are that, notwithstanding of the actions of some individual exiles in Washington, the people of Addis Ababa are satisfied with what the EPRDF interim government has done so far. The conflicts in Ethiopia have to be peacefully and democratically resolved. In other words, if the democratic solution is practiced in Ethiopia, it will also resolve the Eritrean problem. All the parties concerned should work towards the process of peaceful and democratic resolution of all the conflicts in Ethiopia. The interim government has been taking the following actions that lead towards peace and democracy. Ensuring security and stability in the capital and the country as a whole, resuming emergency relief supplies to the affected areas, including deploying all military vehicles towards that objective, transferring ammunition depots from the capital city to other safer areas. All these positive actions towards peace are being watched by diplomats in Addis Ababa and the international community at large. All forces should help in the peaceful and democratic resolution of the conflicts in Ethiopia through the principle of self-determination. The U.S. is on record in recognizing this principle, which is commendable. The U.S. has also to help in the provision of emergency relief and recovery and reconstruction assistance. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much indeed. May I suggest to the other witnesses that if they wish, they may enter their entire statement into the record and could summarize it. Mr. Dresser, you may proceed.
Thank you. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor.
Entire statement into the record and could summarize it. Mr. Dresser, you may proceed.
Thank you. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be allowed to testify before you today. I especially want to thank Chairman Dimali for his invitation to appear. Ethiopians have a deep regard for the United States. not just because of its role in relieving famine, but because it stands as the finest example of the kind of society we wish to emulate. Like the people of Eastern Europe, who read aloud your Declaration of Independence during their freedom demonstrations last year, the words of that magnificent document strike a deep chord in the hearts of Ethiopians. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That is why Ethiopians welcomed American efforts to end the 17-year-old long civil war between Mengistu and various guerrilla movements by sponsoring talks in London beginning last May 27. Unfortunately, however, the London talks did not include some of the most important participants in the years-long struggle to overthrow the Mengistu regime. Those who were invited included the representatives of the tottering communist Mengistu regime, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, or EPLF, whose goal is the separation of Eritrea from the rest of the country, the Oromo Liberation Front, and the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, or EPRDF, which supports the secessionist agenda of the EPLF. Other important organizations that were not invited include the Ethiopian People's Democratic Alliance, or EPDA, Ethiopian National Democratic Organization, also known as Democratic Ethiopia, Ethiopian Democratic Union, Kutat Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Democratic Front, and others. These groups not only seek to keep the country together under a true constitutional government patterned after those in the West, but wish to align themselves with the United States. These democratic organizations never received any support from their natural allies in the West, and thus had no armies. But Mr. Chairman, I would argue that they contributed just as much to the downfall of the regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam as the guerrillas did. It was they who worked incessantly within the bureaucracy, the party, and the army to undermine support for the regime. It was the Ethiopian People's Democratic Alliance who broadcast from a clandestine radio station in a neighboring country the message of a federated Ethiopia in which, like the United States, government is elected and each group has the opportunity to make its voice heard. It was this message that inspired entire brigades of Mengistu's troops to defect. Ethiopians were alarmed and disappointed, therefore, when the Democrats were not invited to negotiate in London. They were even more alarmed when Assistant Secretary of State Cohen invited the EPDRF to enter the capital city, Addis Ababa. Mr. Cohen's motives, I'm sure, were noble: to head off the collapse of public order and pave the way for a provisional government that could begin to put our ravaged country back together. But Ethiopians facing rule by the EPDRF saw this move as a betrayal by the United States. Why did America's blessing of the EPRDF cause such a negative reaction? It was because, rightly or wrongly, they see the EPDRF not as liberators but as conquerors. Are they right to fear the EPDRF so much? After all, it claims to be in favor of a democratic form of government in which each of Ethiopia's many nationalities will be represented, in which human rights will be guaranteed. But what alarms people is that the organization is closely associated with the Tigray People's Liberation Front. It is this close identification with Tigrayan-speaking Ethiopians, who, including Eritreans, make up about 12% of the population, that frightens other Ethiopians. They fear a new ruling class. They also fear that the EPDRF's support of the Eritrean People's Liberation Front's secessionist agenda will result in Eritrea splitting off from Ethiopia, perhaps taking Tigray along with it, tearing the country apart. If the new victors will institute a provisional government that includes representatives of all pro-democratic organizations, that calls a freely elected constituent assembly to hammer out a constitution guaranteeing all Ethiopians the kind of freedoms that Americans take for granted, then the United States should support them. But if they do not do these things, if instead they try to rule Ethiopia as Mengistu did, then Ethiopians of all nationalities will mobilize to do to the victors what the victors in collaboration with others did to Mengistu. It will be a tragedy as great or greater than all that has gone before. Ethiopians were perfectly content to see TPLF, EPLF, the EPDRF, OLF remove Mengistu from power. But they are not about to allow a new tyrant to take his place. Instead, they will fight. Like all my countrymen, I am overjoyed to see the last of Mengistu, and I am willing to give the benefit of the doubt to the new regime. But we cannot take their assurances for granted. A look at the program of the EPDRF shows why. It calls for a multi-party system, but says the rights of the remnants of the anti-democratic feudal class and the fascist Derg need to be curtailed up to and including denying these sectors the right to participate. Using that kind of language, it would be an easy matter to label whomever you wish as feudal or fascist remnants and take away their rights. The EPDRF program calls for major enterprises to be state-owned, operating under, quote-unquote, a national plan. It calls for government control of all trade and the confiscation of urban property by the state. It says that, and I quote, education shall have a revolutionary democratic content, meaning that children will be indoctrinated in the organization's ideology. It sets as a goal, quote, to overcome backward feudal culture and decadent imperialist culture, unquote. This can only mean that cultural traditions, including religion, will come under attack by the state. To anyone familiar with the history of radical revolutions, these statements are warning flags. They threaten the establishment of yet another regime that will try to control people's lives in the name of democracy and impoverish the country with their attempts to plumb production and confiscate wealth. 2 years ago, I published a white paper entitled Picking Up the Pieces, Democracy, Totalitarianism, and Ethiopia's Future, which I would like to introduce as part of my testimony. In it, I presented an alternative to dictatorship by the strongest. I proposed a federal system much like that of the United States. Under my proposal, the Constitution would give autonomy to local governments and guarantee basic rights by discouraging the centralization of power that in Africa invariably results in the rise of one-party rule and the rise of one-man rule. It would get the state off the backs of the people and give them the chance to prosper. Such an approach, I believe, is the only way to prevent further suffering and bloodshed in Ethiopia. But only America can guarantee this outcome. I am not saying that the United States must become embroiled in another years-long conflict. In fact, it will take a minimum effort. The new victors face a stalemate, a continuing struggle against determined resistance. Both sides unable to win, but unable to live with the other. They cannot turn to the Soviet Union, for it has itself become an international basket case. They can only turn to the West. That is why the role of the United States will be so important in the weeks and months to come. We need America to exercise its moral leadership, its tremendous prestige, to ensure that the new provisional government is truly a representative one, including all organizations that resisted Mengistu. If these goals are accomplished, the various ethnic groups will have no reason to fight. All that is needed is to remove the threat of dictatorship. If America uses its influence to guarantee political pluralism and basic human rights, Ethiopians can finally, after 17 years of profound suffering, awake from the nightmare and begin rebuilding their country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Waldy. Smolny, would you pull the microphone closer to you, please? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I thank you, and I'm delighted to be invited to present my testimony on Ethiopia, a country I was forced to leave some 4 or 5 years ago in opposition to Mengistu Haile Mariam's Stalinist and repressive policies. Unfortunately, however, that country has once again come under the clutches of another ruthless and Stalinist tyrant. So it's almost melodramatic. Out goes Mengistu to Harare, and in comes Meles Zenawi through London, a Tweedledee replacing a Tweedledum. The outcome of the London conference was most disastrous for Ethiopia, most destabilizing for the Horn of Africa, and most disquieting for the rest of Africa. Trouble is, the conference, if it really was a conference, suffered from one fatal structural deficiency, which in turn led to some fatal outcomes. First, the confab brought together ethnically stabilizing for the Horn of Africa and most disquieting for the rest of Africa. Trouble is, the conference, if it really was a conference, suffered from one fatal structural deficiency, which in turn led to some fatal outcomes. First, the confab brought together ethnically based armed groups who are the sworn enemies of the Ethiopian nation state and have formed an alliance to dismember and tear down that very state. Those groups with a multi-ethnic base who enjoy the broad support of the Ethiopian people, the vast majority of people who do not belong to any of these political groupings, either armed or political, were pointedly and deliberately excluded. Imagine, sir, imagine, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the PLO's Yasser Arafat sitting together with the Popular Front's George Habash to decide on the fate of the state of Israel without Israel's participation. Second, the conference also sent a signal and set the stage for Ethiopia's dismemberment through Eritrean secession. It was a blow, a dagger blow, aimed at the very heart of the integrity of the Ethiopian state system and a serious threat to the integrity of the African political order. It's no wonder that the decision outraged millions of Ethiopians all over. One cannot overstress the deep-seated, instinctive, and fierce resolve of all Ethiopians to preserve their national unity and independence. That unique independence had been defended by fierce resistance to no less than 8 foreign invasions, and that had forged a consciousness and pride of national unity and culture found nowhere on the continent of Africa. Those foreign invasions have by no means spared the territory known only in modern times as Eritrea. In fact, of the 8 invasions from the south, the west, and the south and the north have involved Eritrea. This was scarcely surprising. For centuries, it was the political and the cultural center of Ethiopia, with the capital at Adulis, symbol of the independence which others, even before the colonial period, sought to suppress. Ethiopia, as the cultural, political, and economic sector of the Horn and its coastline of Eritrea, stood as a vast barrier to both European and Arab expansionist designs. That the people of Eritrea had, through a process of self-determination under the auspices of the United Nations, had exercised the right to determine, and had determined that by deliberately and voluntarily linking their territory in federal association with Ethiopia was unfortunately, conveniently forgotten. Any future decision on Eritrea, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I would assure you, if and when it is taken, would have to be taken not by the inhabitants of one province, but by the people of Ethiopia as a whole. Thirdly, the decision to let in the TPLF, the African counterpart of the Asian Khmer Rouge, I would like to call them the Khmer Noir. Yes. The decision to let in the TPLF and occupy Addis Ababa and grab state power was tragic and inexplicable. How an ideologically intoxicated, ethnically narrowly based guerrilla force, as Francis Le Monde did say in this morning's editorial, headed by a radical Stalinist with no experience to raise and administer a family, let alone administer a country of 50 million people, should be asked to march in and assume state responsibility is beyond me to comprehend, and I ask for divine intervention. That must be the first time when a self-declared Stalinist is sanctioned by the United States to take over state power. The upshot of all these decisions and actions is to seriously compromise Ethiopia's fundamental interests. And the country is saddled now with a Stalinist regime which is just as repressive as Mengistu Haile Mariam's. But whatever has happened, Mr. Chairman, has happened in London. And it is time to correct mistakes and move on. There is no suggestion on my part at any rate that there was any deliberate plan on behalf of Mr. Cohen or the State Department or the administration in general to put Ethiopia in jeopardy. That has never been suggested. Ethiopia is always in love with Americans and respectful of the traditions and values and democratic institutions of America. So it remains to this very day. But mistakes have been made, and it is important, I think, to correct the mistakes and move on. And how can we move on? Well, I think the first thing is that the United States should reaffirm its traditional support for Ethiopia's unity and territorial integrity. The conflict in Eritrea should be resolved within the framework of a united Ethiopia on the basis of some form of federal association. Next, the United States should also work for the speedy democratization of the Ethiopian political system and the institution of multi-party democracy in the country. The U.S. should have as its immediate objective the broadening of the current narrowly based rebel junta so that the vast majority of people excluded from the system under the London arrangements could be embraced and brought into the system. It should also work for the withdrawal of the EPLF and EPRDF occupying forces from Addis Ababa and other towns, and their replacement by a national army and a police representing all ethnic groups in the country. To that end, Mr. Chairman, I urge Assistant Secretary of State, Mr. Cohen, to invite and preside over a conference of all political groups, both within and outside the country. I particularly urge him to invite the coalition of Ethiopian democratic forces, which enjoys wide support in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian people love and respect and admire the American people. The United States is the only country with the political and moral stature to usher in democracy in Ethiopia and help defend it against dismemberment. I therefore ask members of the committee, I also ask the administration, in particular the State Department, to reconsider the decisions taken and the actions taken in London and bring about an orderly transfer of power from this tiny, tightly knit group of a military junta to a broadly based representative government in Addis Ababa with the unity and territorial integrity of the country intact. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Have you voted already? No. There's a vote on the floor now. The members will proceed, but I will continue to accommodate our last witness. Mr. Giorgi, you may